Welcome, fellow humans. Today I'm going to talk about non-REM dreams. I've always been fascinated with sleep and dreaming, as you can tell from other videos I've made on the topic. And so when I discovered that dreaming doesn't just happen during REM sleep, but there are also non-REM dreams, I knew I had to find out more. But before I go into detail on non-REM dreams, I'm going to talk about the path that led me to discovering that they are a thing. Because I was trying to figure out what an altered state that I often entered when I was a teenager was. This state was pleasurable and seemed to have some things in common with what we would call a flow state, except that it wasn't productive. A flow state is when your attention is completely absorbed on something that you're doing and you're able to just work through the thing, and it feels like a very enjoyable way to get things done. And the difference with this was that I wasn't actually working on anything. I would be more daydreaming. I'd have a chain of thoughts, and then I would suddenly get startled, and I would realize where I was at the end of the chain of thoughts, but I would have absolutely no idea how I got there. And unlike a flow state where I would have something to show for it, for example, I would often enter a flow state when I was doing chemistry homework, and then I would have the answer to chemistry problems. When I would come out of this state, I would have some sort of nonsensical thought. They were always completely weird and random. They varied every single time, but they never seemed to have any real connection to reality. It would be something like, but how am I going to figure out the mass of all the bees? And I would feel like I had been thinking about a chain of things that led to I would need to calculate the mass of all the bees, but I would have no idea what had led me there or how I could possibly have gotten to that conclusion. I hadn't started by thinking about bees. I don't know why you would need the mass of them. And so it was always kind of nice and relaxing, and it was interesting to see what completely bizarre place it led me to. But I wasn't really sure what was happening. Most often I would enter this state when I just had a lot of downtime, especially on long boring car rides. So I'd just be sitting there and I would let my thoughts wander and I would just kind of zone out, and then at some point I would come to with these weird random thoughts. And so I was trying to figure out, what am I doing? What state is this? And I discovered while researching different ways that people can be thinking and states of consciousness and such, that when studies on sleep and dreaming were done initially, they found that most dreaming happens during the REM phase. And this surprised me because I thought that all dreams happened during the REM phase. I was always taught that, dreaming was the REM phase. And when you're in the REM phase, you are dreaming, that is true. But there are also dreams that happen outside the REM phase. So I wanted to know, are they different? And how common is this? And all of that. And the distinction that they found was that REM dreams tend to be significantly more sensory and coherent. They'll often have little storylines, and they were basically describing what I know of as dreams and what I think of as dreams. But non-REM dreams tend to be just little incoherent fragments of dream thoughts. They don't tend to be visual. They don't tend to have storylines. And that's when I realized that that altered state that I was in was actually sleep. I wasn't doing anything special. I wasn't, meditating or reaching some higher plane or anything like that. Not that I thought that I was reaching some higher plane, but all that I was doing was I was entering light sleep and then getting woken up out of it. And so I was having non-REM dreams. And it made perfect sense, thus, that they were weird little fragments of nonsense, because that's what dreams generally are. And on the one hand, I was a little disappointed I hadn't found some cool state of consciousness, but on the other hand, I've always been so fascinated by sleep and dreaming that the fact that I was sleeping without realizing it and dreaming without realizing it was kind of okay. It did make sense when I realized that I was sleeping without being aware that I was sleeping, because it was only light sleep. And when you enter light sleep, it is normal to not know that you're sleeping. If all you ever get is light sleep, you will feel like you didn't sleep at all. That actually happened to me on my first sleep lab. I got almost 2 hours of light sleep, but no REM and no deep sleep. And from my perspective, I felt like I was tossing and turning all night long. I know that I did sleep because there was data. It was measured. They were, measuring my brain waves, so clearly I had slept, but I didn't feel like I had slept a wink. And that's completely normal for light sleep. So that's all that it was. But now I know the difference between dreams and non-REM dreaming, and I've also realized that when I was a kid and I was taught the term half asleep, which I don't know how common that usage is, I haven't heard it in a while, but I think being half asleep is actually just drifting in and out of light sleep, and that's why it feels like it's not really asleep, but yet there is a sleep element, and it's because this light sleep just doesn't feel like being asleep. On the upside, now that I understand it, I'm actually a lot better at recognizing when I have been in light sleep. I still can't always do it because it's really hard if you don't remember any fragments to know whether or not you've actually fallen asleep unless you're keeping track of the passage of time and you realize there's a big gap or something, because it just feels like you're lying there. But it's kind of neat being able to figure out those things that I used to not be able to understand. Anyway, that's my story, and if you liked it, please click like, and if you'd like to hear more similar content, please subscribe. If you know someone who might find it interesting, then by all means share it. But most of all, if you have any thoughts or questions or comments, I would love to read your comments. Thank you.